And welcome to today's edition of Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Liebereman. Well, as you know, we are approaching the 24th anniversary of 9/11. That was September 11th, 2001. And although each year there have been some in power who want us, and some not even in power, but just to want us to forget about 9/11. It is very important to remember it. And I'm going to be talking to you about why, and I'm going to be telling you about why we're in more danger than ever before. In fact, today's show is called The Terrorist Therapist Warns We're in More Danger of Attacks Today Than 9/11. Now, if you're wondering who the terrorist therapist is, that's me. Right after 9/11, actually, as it was going on, I'm a born and bred New Yorker, but when 9/11 happened, I had already moved to California. My daughter was living in Manhattan. She had just started school, her freshman year at Barnard, Columbia. And at first, I didn't realize, just like most of us, we all have our stories. Where were we on on September 11th? Um, And my story was I was home in California, and first thing I knew was that my assistant had called or emailed or something to let me know that she's going to be late because something to do with a plane crashing into buildings in New York. I'm thinking, what kind of an excuse is that? And then, of course, I started Googling and looking into what was really going on. Um, and was shocked just like everybody else. And the thing that happened soon after the 9/11 attacks started were that I asked myself, what, as a born and bred New Yorker, I love New York. Said, and I still say, that I feel very lucky to have been born there, because if you can do well in New York, it's like that song. If you can something in New York, you can do it anywhere. What's New York, New York, Frank Sinatra. Um, and you have to sort of learn to survive in New York, learn to get ahead. It's not, it's a lot harder than a lot of other places, but it's also stimulating. And it's also, if you can get ahead there, you can get ahead anywhere. It's true. Paraphrasing the song. So right away, I was affected by it. And I said to myself, I just had this feeling. I didn't really know anything about terrorism before 9/11. I mean, really, that was one of I always thought, like, I can't know about everything, like in the newspapers. Remember when we would sit down and read newspapers? I would think, well, I'm not going to be able to know about everything in this newspaper. I'm going to have to skip some things. So I would skip sports because I liked playing sports, but I didn't like reading about them particularly, or even watching them for that matter. So sports were out. Then terrorism. Terrorism. That's really complicated, and it's not going to affect me in my life. And why do I have to read about that? So that was out. And of course, until 9/11. And so while 9/11 was happening, uh, because of course it was, the whole day, it wasn't just the few minutes in the morning when they attacked the Twin Towers, each tower, and then attacked the Pentagon, and then the plane that the brave passengers were able to deflect from going to its target in Washington, D.C., which people think was the White House. While all this was happening, all that day, I was thinking to myself, somehow I had this realization. Now, I'm not saying I'm a psychic. It's not like, and God didn't speak. Well, I don't know, maybe God did speak to me, but there was some realization that terrorism was going to be the most significant, the most dangerous, the most deadly thing in my life and in the lives of everyone who was alive on 9/11. And so I asked myself, I'm always trying to do things to help people. I mean, that was kind of um, that's why I became America's psychiatrist. Actually, I became, well, that's a whole other story. Anyway, but as America's psychiatrist, I'm always looking at what is happening in America and in the world and trying to help people cope with it. And so it was natural for me to think, if this is going to be the scariest thing, the most dangerous thing, most deadly thing in our lifetime, what am I going to do to help people with it? And so, right then and there, I decided that I was going to dedicate a significant part of my work. This is primarily unpaid work. Um, um, 90% of it is unpaid. But I wasn't thinking about that on 9/11, whether I was going to get paid for it. I just made the commitment to myself that I was going to spend a significant part of um, my work life helping people cope with terrorism and helping people be aware of the ongoing threat of terrorism. So, and I thought, I am well suited to do this because one, I was already an author by 9/11. I had written, let's see, I guess I had only written one book by then, but it was a bestseller. So I thought, okay, I can do this. Um, and I'm on television all the time. I was certainly by then too, and radio, and um, I'm not sure if I had my own radio show at that point yet, um, but anyhow, uh, so an author, a media personality, a speaker, a psychiatrist, duh. I'm not going to leave that out. That's kind of important if I'm going to be helping people cope with terrorism. Um, and all of these things, all of my background, I thought would be suitable for helping people cope with terrorism, even though I knew nothing about terrorism at that point, other than the horror of 9/11. So, what did I do? First of all, I started enmeshing myself in terrorism, in learning about terrorism. And I went to conferences and I found mentors who were people who had been reading about terrorism, or even writing books about terrorism before I finally got into it. And around the same time, I started doing things really quickly. Around the same time that I was getting familiar with terrorism, um, I also started working on my first project as the terrorist therapist. And that was to create an audio and then a video program that airlines played in their in-flight entertainment. And because back in 2001, there weren't people, or at least not as many people. I mean, we were pretty much dependent upon in-flight entertainment provided by the airplane. So I created these um, audio video programs. I called myself Shrink on Board, and I did it was guided imagery. It was getting people to visualize things, and it started out with getting the person comfortable, settled into their seat and into the airplane, and then the second part was going deeper into trying to understand things about oneself, and then the last part was helping people to get make the transition from the airplane experience to whatever it was that they were headed towards. And it was very successful. Got on domestic and international airlines. And and then what did I do? Then I think well, first of all, I was helping people individually and in groups. I was doing some speaking engagements. I was doing media appearances. Um, and then in 2005 came came the 9/11 for London, and that was 7/7. July 7th, 2005. And I had started writing things to write a book about terrorism. And then in 2005, when I originally I thought I would start in America, but in 2005, when 7/7 happened, I got asked to write a book by a London publisher. And it came out on the 1 year anniversary of their 7/7, so 7/7, 2006. And I went over there for like 2 weeks, and I had interviewed people who were families of the victims of their 7/7. I put some of that in the book. I put poems from some of the students in schools. Teachers gave me poems that kids had written, and so anyway, I went there, and there were various services, particularly one at the um, cemetery. And so, I was trying to help people sort of one-on-one or in a group, or I gave a speech at the ceremony, and of course did lots of media. And I had written this book called Coping with Terrorism, Dreams Interrupted. And I wrote about how terrorism affects all aspects of our life, our love life, our work life, our family life. Um, I wrote about, terrorism, how terrorism affects kids, how terrorism affects teenagers, and so on. A whole bunch of different things. I wrote about how, I started off with a test, the terrorist stress test, so that people could determine just how stressed they were from terrorism. And what else? And then I talked about how it's hard. In my last chapter, I talked about how it's hard to um, when things happen that you don't plan for, how that makes it even harder. Just a whole, I mean, I spent a year basically writing the book. Well, not quite a year because I wanted it before the next 7/7. I spent almost a year writing it. And okay, so that was that. And then what? Then I wrote a book that was published in America, and that was called Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. And um, that is that book, and I'm going to share at in the last segment, I'm going to share um, some parts of the book. Um, it's a book it was the first and only book about terrorism for parents and kids. Well, for grown-ups and kids, for parents and teachers, any grown-up who has a connection with kids, because the part about the grown-up helps them to deal with their own feelings about terrorism and to answer questions that kids asked most frequently. Um, and and then this next, so that was the first half, and then the second half was a picture book for kids about terrorism. And what is a terrorist and all of that. I'll go into it later. But now, why do I say that we are in a more dangerous time now? Oh, and I should say, so when I wrote that book, it won 5 awards. It won the best book of the first, I think, was the London Book Festival. Then it won an award at the Paris Book Festival. Then it won 2 awards in America, New York, and Hollywood. And then also the Mom's Choice Award. And so, but when it came to, because it won awards in Paris and London, I went to those places for the ceremony, and I did various things in each of those places, to meet with the people and talk to them about terrorism, and you know, in England, I went to London, and I went to Manchester, because Manchester had that horrible terror attack where with Ariana Grande when she was in concert. Anyhow, so I've had a lot of it's been quite a journey, and it's been very hard in some ways, but it's been very fulfilling, because people don't talk about this kind of stuff. And it was very helpful for people in all these different places, and also Belgium, because I have friends in Belgium still from when I went to medical school there. And um and actually, and I lived in London. Well, I'll get into that later. But anyhow, so my point is, people were happy in all these places that I went. And now, oh, I left out. Now I'm volunteering by helping people in Israel by Zoom. So all of this has, of course, been hard, but very fulfilling because nobody is doing it. Nobody is talking to these people. Nobody is, it's all this sort of, I'll talk to you about PTSD and I'll talk to you about, like if you're depressed. I mean, but people don't want to name it. It's kind of like a Voldemort, right? In Harry Potter, he who shall not be named. Um, so people appreciate that I am willing to talk about it, not just the feelings. Of course, I talk about their feelings and try to help them with their feelings. That's kind of the point. But also talk to them about what terrorism is and why we should still be very concerned about it. And I host a podcast called The Terrorist Therapist Show, and I've been doing that for probably around almost 10 years now. And in that I warn people, like the latest thing, it's like kind of like the top things in terrorism of the week. And I warn people about things. I've been warning them. And so it's very, very frustrating and disconcerting that even today, people are so much in denial about the fact that we in America, and of course the West in general, Europe has been almost taken over totally by terrorists. And so, I've been trying and am still trying to waken people up to the danger, to the imminent danger. And when we come back, that's what I'll talk to you about. How in America, and some of it goes for the rest of the world too, of course, how much danger we're in and what we need to do about it. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Liebereman. We're talking today about the terrorist therapist warns we're in more danger of attacks today than 9/11. Now, as I said before, I am the terrorist therapist. I know, I've been using this name almost since the beginning. And people, tend to ask the terrorist therapist, what do you mean? Are you a therapist for terrorists? Well, I'm a psychiatrist, but not for terrorists. Not in terms of treating terrorists, but I do analyze terrorists and then explain that to people who are in danger of their attacks. So, so let me tell you about some of the reasons why I say that we are in greater danger today than we were in the days preceding 9/11, when we were, innocent. Those were our innocent days. This was the first attack on American soil. I mean, Pearl Harbor, yes, technically was on American soil, but this was the first attack, 9/11, on the mainland of America. Now, Pearl Harbor brings up an interesting contrast. Like I've read about Pearl Harbor, um, learned about it in school, all of that, but it didn't really. I didn't feel anything about it. I even visited Pearl Harbor one of the times that I went to Hawaii. It was very interesting, but I didn't have, anything in my heart or in my stomach or any kind of gut reaction to it. I mean, it was horrible and it got us into World War II, but um, but I couldn't really feel it. And that's the difference with um 9/11, that whether, especially if you were in New York or Washington, D.C., or in Pennsylvania, where it landed in the field, um, you were particularly affected. It was particularly traumatizing. But do you know they did a study that showed that, or studies that showed that people who weren't even in any of those places, weren't in any of the direct hits, in an area around the direct hits, anywhere in New York City, for example, of course, New Jersey was affected too, because they could see the Twin Towers from New Jersey. But no, people who weren't in those areas, weren't in Pennsylvania, weren't in Washington, D.C., um, they found out that those people who were nowhere near the attack sites, but who had watched the buildings fall, the World Trade Center fall, the Twin Towers fall, a lot of times, and we were all kind of mesmerized by it. Um, that was the thing. You kept wanting to know more. And of course, every broadcast would lead in with the Twin Towers falling. So, and there have been movies and so on since then. But at that time, on the day of 9/11, or on that in that period, people who were nowhere near the sites, but who watched the news reports of it, became traumatized, developed PTSD, just like people who were in the area. I mean, people who were in the area, like in Manhattan, may well have had it more seriously, but it affected people who were nowhere near it. So, um, okay, so that, and everybody has their story, as I was alluding to before, about where were you when 9/11 happened? Everyone can tell you where they were when 9/11 happened. My story, as I told you, wasn't that exciting, really, but a lot of people have more exciting stories. And even if you were at home, like in Kansas, nowhere near New York, um, you still remember, you remember when it came on television, or radio, or somebody told you about it. It was that traumatic, that, nothing like this had ever happened before. Okay, now, one of the problems for why people are so complacent today, and why they think they don't have to worry about terrorism anymore, and that was something that happened in 2001, they're not going to come again, don't worry about it. Um, one reason why we have a large percentage of the population now that thinks that way is because every year there gets to be more and more people, a bigger and bigger percentage of the population who were born before, I'm sorry, who were born after 9/11, and didn't experience that. And And so they really don't have that feeling in their gut, or in their heart, or in their head about what that was like. We up until that day, we in America uh we're very fortunate. I mean, we're still fortunate, but we're very fortunate to not have had a war on our soil, on our mainland soil. And so it was like a totally new experience. We never really thought about it much. I mean, you learn about World War One, you learn about World War Two, you think about, oh, great, didn't happen here. But then it did. And so it was very disconcerting for everybody. Now, I mean, even the people, even in England, their 7/7, they, like, some of the poems that I got, they were poems that kids had written, some for 7/7, but some for 9/11. They were even affected by 9/11, and people in other countries too. I mean, now I have told me, and I'm sure you probably know this too, that our 9/11 affected the world. It didn't just affect New York or DC or Pennsylvania, it affected the world, because people like this, because everyone was destabilized, disoriented, because because America seemed like a safe place um, by then, at that time. And nobody thought about a war, about an attack on America. So, okay, so now we know it can happen. It did happen, but people have faded with each year. that has gone by, people have become more desensitized, have forgotten more, have you know, have been in denial more. Like the thing is, whenever anything really horrible happens, like let's say when you're a child and children who have been abused or children who had a parent die or some other kind of traumatic event, they it's very hard to talk about it. Like in therapy, it's hard for people, grown-ups, to talk about it, or certainly children, but even grown-ups, to talk about these most traumatic events of their childhood. And really that's what you have to do in therapy. As an aside, by the way, in order to resolve some of the things that you have in your current life as an adult, because all these traumas of childhood affect who you become and what kinds of things affect you and how you act in life and so on. So in therapy, in psychotherapy, talk therapy, that's what it's all about, is looking into the past to find the predecessors of whatever problems you're having in the present. So, but what we do, the reason why it's so hard is because people cover over their bad memories. They don't want to remember their most traumatic events. And so the brain, this is where the brain comes in and it protects us from thinking about and feeling the trauma for the rest of our lives. I mean, consciously. It pushes it into our unconscious mind and covers it over. And like on a day-to-day, average moment, we're not really thinking about those things. So when I want to talk about 9/11, as the terrorist therapist, here I go, folks. We're approaching the most important day of the year to sort of bring this home, why we need to still be worried about it, about terrorists attacking us. um, People, their first reaction is to protect themselves and not really hear about it. And a lot of people don't even do anything for 9/11. Now, of course, a lot of even the media, I was going to say, of course, a lot of television stations play movies about 9/11 or like Flight 93. There are some movies that are um, very helpful, very like not, Flight 93 shows the passengers attacking the terrorists and stopping them from continuing to head towards Washington, D.C. Um, but like even television stations don't have as much time, whether it's movies or news or whatever, don't have as much time dedicated to 9/11 as they had even the first year after 9/11. And each year, because I've been doing stuff in the media every year since then, and I can tell you from firsthand experience that they think people don't want to watch it. They want to protect people. They think we don't have to remember this. It was a bad time. Who wants to remember this bad thing that happened? And the reason that you have to remember this bad thing that happened is because it's going to happen again. Not 9/11, not the exact same thing. But anybody who has been watching the news or online, like on Twitter, for example, um, there are pictures, is video of things happening. As I started to say before about Europe, this has become more and more prevalent, more and more dangerous. It used to be that it was particularly bad. Well, actually, in Belgium, where I went to medical school, they had a section already back in the day. We won't go into what day that was, but back in the day, they already had a section near Brussels it was like a no-go zone. Belgium in Europe, in some ways, Belgium is the worst. It was the beginning, in Belgium, in the attacks in France came from some of the people in Belgium. They were participated in that, in making the attack in France, in Paris. Um, so anyhow, so even back then they had this section, and I remember going on the train from Louvain, where I went to medical school, to Brussels. And every time we passed this area, there was something so foreboding about it. Now, this was way before 9/11. So, I was not even thinking about terrorism. Um, but it was just, I could see the people who were on the station there. Oh, yes, I know I'm Islamophobic. One thing, yeah, well, I did say that. I just want to say again, not all Muslims are terrorists, not all terrorists are Muslim. But anyhow, for those who, oh, you're looking at the platform in the station and you thought there was something wrong with those people. Yeah, I did. They seemed very malevolent. They seemed evil. And in fact, they were. They turned out to be. Now, and so even though I did not think of the word terrorism back then, um, I did have, I'll never forget that feeling because I would look out the window. Well, I would usually look out the window, but it was just very striking. A very striking feeling that something scary was happening here, something dangerous. Anyway, so that's Belgium. And then in Paris, and in France, do you remember a few years ago there was the fire in the Eiffel Tower, and they never did come up with the reason why that fire started, right? Well, I know why it started. It was somebody who was a terrorist. It was like they said it had something to do with the electricity because there was work being done on the Eiffel Tower at the time that it caught fire. And so there were a lot of workmen. And in Paris, where I lived in Paris while I was going to medical school in Belgium for my last years, and because Paris was a lot more interesting than Belgium. Um, and so so I know these things that a lot of the workers, typically the workers in Paris, were from these Middle Eastern countries, terrorist laden countries. And so undoubtedly they were part of the work crews that were on the Eiffel Tower when this fire broke out. And I did I talked about it on my terrorist therapist podcast at the time that it was a terror attack. That they were not saying that it was. I don't even know if they've admitted it to themselves. But just today, I saw something in the news where someone in Paris, where terrorists in Paris were talking about how we're threatening to destroy the Eiffel Tower. So, like, duh, that's what it was before. And I would imagine that some people know more details and know by now that it really was a terror attack. But but anyhow, there are terror attacks in France, not just in Paris, but in France, the south of France, all over France. They bomb or set fire to churches. Like it's like an almost a daily occurrence in France. And because why did the terrorists do this? Because terrorists um they think that they are doing something good when they cause an attack, when they kill the infidels, the non-believers, um, because that is what in the Quran, that is what it tells them that Allah wants them to do, to destroy, to kill the unbelievers, to kill. And of course, in Israel, in the Middle East, they teach them from the time that they're 4 years old. And by the way, in case someone doesn't know this already, Obama went to madrasas. That's what they call the schools who teach terror to little kids. And Obama was the most anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, pro-terrorist president that we have ever had. Um, so 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 it's not a surprise. But anyway, so they think if they what the holiest thing that they can do in their life is to destroy the non-believers, not just Jews, but Christians, all kinds of Christians, Buddhists, anybody who doesn't believe that Allah is the greatest God. In fact, when they yell Allahu Akbar when they attack, that means our God is the greatest. Not just God is great, our God is the greatest. And that's what they believe, and that's what they were taught since they were 3 or 4 years old. And so, which is why when they did attack Israel on October 7th, you could see in their eyes the religious zeal because that's where it's coming from. It's going up to heaven. It's believing in the Prophet Muhammad, who told them that Allah says that, if you do all these good things, destroy the infidels, notably, that you will, when you go to heaven, you will get 72 virgins and lots of other goodies if you're a martyr. So this is deeply ingrained in them. I was talking about it being ingrained, a feeling for 9/11. Well, it's deeply ingrained for people who, for people who want to follow, to do the holiest thing that they think they can, that they are taught. And so but we have become complacent since then. We have, we don't believe, we're in denial, like what I was saying, like what people do to what the brain helps us do to protect ourselves from remembering all the most traumatic events of our life. Like we couldn't function if every day we remembered, like the 10 most traumatic events of our life, and then we're supposed to do our work, or supposed to, have time for our families and so on. So, but to give you an example, I'm going to give you an example of, I'm going to tell you, like more than 10 reasons for why we're in danger, greater danger today than we were before. But I'm going to start with, obviously, I'm not going to be able to tell you all of them right now. I mean, I'm going to continue in the next segment, but the one that is the most shocking is that in New York City, there is a mayor race going on, as you probably know. And who is the one who is the candidate who is in the lead for mayor of New York City? Remember, the site of the Twin Towers being destroyed on 9/11, over 3,000 people killed, approximately 3,000. Well, now it's more because lots of people have died. The first responders and so on working at Ground Zero have been dying of cancer ever since then. So and that's more than 3,000. So anyhow, this horrendous trauma, people living in New York City who experience this horrendous trauma are about to, perhaps, I hope something will happen to not make this come through. But right now, Zohran Mamdani, essentially a terrorist, is leading in the mayoral race. And shocking. People have short memories. They're in a big denial. And I just hope something happens that's not how it ends up, because that is not only bad for New Yorkers, it's bad for the whole country. Stay tuned. I'll tell you, this time I'll tell you about all the reasons, well, other reasons, additional reasons why we're in greater danger. And welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Liebereman. Today we're talking about the terrorist therapist warns we're in more danger of attacks today than 9/11. And I am your terrorist therapist. And um, I'm going to now get to some of the reasons besides Mamdani. That is like the most shocking reason. But I'm going to tell you some other reasons for why we're in more danger. Okay, so terrorists, even those on the terrorist watch list, have been crossing into America during the past 4 years while we essentially had no border. As you know, during Biden's presidency and Kamala Harris's, she was supposed to be the border czar. Um, Both of them, I hope you know by now that it wasn't an accident. It wasn't just that they were doing shoddy work, and it wasn't just that Biden had dementia. Um, it was on purpose to allow all of these people in, um, because the idea was that this would bring in a large group of people, by the end of 4 years, which it did, and these would be people who they expected to vote Democrat. So, um, So it was on purpose. And there are all kinds of people who came in, but including terrorists. First of all, there were 80,000 people brought in from Afghanistan when Biden surrendered in Afghanistan, the which will go down as probably the worst thing that an American president has done. Well, I mean, it's hard, along with Obama, but Obama was the one really calling the shots at that time. He was directing Biden because Biden had dementia, increasing dementia. I called it encroaching dementia before the election. I was trying to warn people, don't vote for Biden. He has encroaching dementia. Anyway, and those that did uh, ignored that. Anyhow, so people have come in, but so 80,000 people were brought in, and I'm not saying that all 80,000 of them are terrorists. However, in the chaos that was in Afghanistan when he flew them in, there was no way of vetting them sufficiently to know to separate the terrorists from the Afghans who helped the Americans. I mean, that was the idea, was to help them. It was the fact to reward them for helping the Americans in the war, like being translators and things like that. Anyhow, so so they have been crossing over during these past 4 years, and people we don't know where they are. So terrorist cells are lying in wait all over America. There are cells in some cities like Buffalo and Detroit and Portland, Seattle, and Virginia. Some of those cells have been exposed and destroyed, but by Homeland Security. But they are just the tip of the iceberg. Terrorists believe, this is what I said before, terrorists believe that their God wants them to take over the West. They make this clear by shouting, Allahu Akbar, our God is the greatest, when they attack. Terrorists are boldly creating no-go zones, not just hiding out in cells all over America, but building these areas, these large areas where they build a huge mosque, and then they build housing surrounding the mosque. And they built this huge compound in Texas, and they're building one in Florida, and which is kind of shocking. You wouldn't think that red states like Texas and Florida, I mean, it's not like Minneapolis or Minnesota, where Dearborn is the Dearbornistan, where there are a lot of radical Islamists. So they are building these huge compounds, and they are no-go zones. In other words, if you are not if you are not Muslim, and if you are not a dedicated, if not radical Muslim, you can't live there. Then, so they are no-go zones for other people. Then there is something called the Red-Green Alliance. Now, this is not, you don't hear about this in mainstream media. But the Red-Green Alliance, this is something I've learned about, back when I was first starting to learn about terrorism right after 9/11. And what it is the red color represents radical leftists, people who are socialists, communists, red, of course, communism, and and that's one group. The green group are the terrorists, because green is the color that they use a lot. And so it's a red-green alliance, meaning that these two groups of increasing numbers of people have allied, have come together for the purpose of destroying America. Now, there are a lot of things that they don't believe in. I mean, for example, leftists who aren't radical Islamists don't believe in Sharia necessarily, Sharia law. I mean, that's the thing that first it's to when there are enough of them, and well, this is their plan. When there are, I hope this never happens, of course, but if there ever were to be enough of them, and they were to take over America. First, it would be to get people to convert to Islam and to pay a tax because they're not Islamists. So to pay it's called the jizya, a jizya tax. And then but if people don't want to do that, if Americans, if people who aren't radical Islamists, they don't want to change their religion to be Islam, um, then they have to well, then they get killed is what happens. Anybody who doesn't want to convert gets killed. Um, and but anyone who does convert, like everybody who would be, let's say in America, would have to go under Sharia law. That is their aim, to take over countries and convert people, kill people, and have them follow Sharia law, which is an incredibly difficult and sort of irrational set of laws. It's very bad for women. Women have to have a much lower position under Sharia law than men. Women are property. Women get beaten up by their men because for whatever reason. They have many wives. The men can have as many wives as they want. There are all these laws that are not good for women. It's also not good for LGBTQ plus people because they don't believe in that. Islamists. They say that people who believe in LGBTQ plus, that's bad, that's sinful under Sharia law, and so they march these people off rooftops. And that of course reminds me how uh, what Benjamin Netanyahu said, the prime minister of Israel, um, when he talked in front of Congress, he said, "Gays for Gaza," because that's what a lot of the protesters, they had the signs, "Gays for Gaza." He said, "Gays for Gaza are like chickens for KFC," meaning if you are a chicken, you wouldn't be rooting for KFC because KFC kills you to make lunch and dinner for people to make their money. So it's the same thing. If you are LGBTQ plus, um, that's not okay in according to Sharia law, and so you have to die. And a typical way that they kill these people in the Middle East is by marching them off rooftops. So so it doesn't make any sense. But anyhow, but there, this is it's just such a perfect example of how ignorant people are about what terrorism is, what radical Islam is. Anyway, let me continue. So this Red Green Alliance, um, even though there are things that they each don't really like about the other, like the green doesn't like the LGBTQ, the red doesn't necessarily like Sharia law, there are various things that they don't agree on. Um, and if they ever were to take over a country, then they would be have to fight it out amongst themselves. But they're not worried about that right now. They're just worried about destroying America and destroying the West. Um, now let's see. Yes, that's college protesters who shout their allegiance to Hamas and other terrorist groups are the useful idiots. That's what they're called, of terrorists. In other words, they're manipulated by real terrorists and willing to fight for their cause. So basically, we have terrorists in our streets already in America and not hiding it, whether it's gays for Gaza or pro-Palestinian, blah blah blah. They're terrorists. They're espousing the terrorist ideology. Perhaps not all of it, and I don't know that all of it are doing it to get their 72 virgins, but they just feel this kinship, and the connection is because they have been taught in school that there are just two kinds of people in the world: the victims, the oppressors, and the oppressed. And so they identify with the oppressed, the Palestinians, and think that Israel is the big bad oppressor. And so when they are supporting Palestine, it's like supporting the oppressed people, and they identify with people who are oppressed. You know, um, so then let's see. Oh, um, Useful idiots. So yes, okay, so that's what they're called. The number of people born, it's born after 9/11, not before. Um, the number of people born after 9/11 is an increasing percentage, as I was talking about. And therefore they don't feel 9/11, and therefore they don't aren't as aware of why they need to prevent attacks and prevent voting in people like Mamdani, who, do not believe in protecting America from terrorists. Um, then we have domestic terrorists who have been recruited by radical Islamists in the Middle East. And radical Islamists in the Middle East, but in America to believe in their ideology. In other words, the terrorists, we haven't seen many terrorist attacks recently. Why is that? Because when COVID was happening, when we were supposed to stay in our little homes and not go out, terrorists, it wasn't a good time for terrorists to attack because there weren't many people in concerts, theaters, on the streets, so they didn't attack. But now we are all out and vulnerable. Um, but during that time, during this COVID time when they weren't attacking as much, they were still recruiting. Then also, the Muslim call to prayer, the Adhan, is being broadcast loudly in an increasing number of American cities, including Astoria in New York, that's in Queens, where Mamdani was elected to the New York State Assembly, and from that, he's going to try to be mayor. Um, and cities in New Jersey, Minnesota, Michigan, and yet some cities don't allow church bells to ring as loudly because there are noise ordinances. Um, and um, And then also, anytime if you want to say anything to alert people to this danger, you're called an Islamophobe. Well, call me an Islamophobe, but I have seen, I have been watching for years the radical Islamists, migrants, gradually taking over Europe. I talked about Belgium, I talked about France, also in England. Right now, England is the worst country, is the country most in danger. Native English people, British people, and you'd think that would be the last, these would be the last people who would let this happen. I mean, Churchill is turning over in his grave, and so is the Queen. To think, how much they have suffered in wars, and they were tough and they saved England, and now to these people who've gotten into power um, are on the side of the radical Islamists, and they are letting the boats come in every day. There are more and more boats, and they're building homes. The thing is, when these people, when they come to Europe, they get on the dole, they get on social services, they just get free money, free food, free everything. And the poor Brits, the poor French, the poor Belgians, the poor Germans, it started with Germany when Merkel let in, it was her brilliant idea to let in all these people because she was worried that her population in Germany was getting older and that they wouldn't be able to be as productive. So that's one of the excuses that they give for why they're letting in all these radical Islamists. But you don't see this in the mainstream media. You don't see how the continent is being destroyed, but and England. That's in addition to the continent. Um, that is what the radical Islamists are planning to do and are on their way to doing in America. Not necessarily by another 9/11 attack, although of course there's going to be more attacks, but by gradually insinuating themselves into politics, into education, and into the media. And that is how they have been gaining in strength. And we are in deep trouble. So we need to elect people who are going to protect us, not people who are going to welcome in more boats. Well, thank you for listening to Dr. Carol's Couch. Oh, yes, and I was going to read for you some, maybe I'll do that on another show. I know you can't really see it because of the screen. But anyhow, so my book is called Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. And in the meantime, go to my website because you'll be able to see the videos that are going to be on this truck that I have go around New York City every 9/11 anniversary. And but you can see it if you're not going to be able to see it in New York itself. Go to my website, terroristtherapist.com, and you can watch the videos there.